Well, happy Sunday. Welcome to week 2 of Runner. I am thrilled to pieces to be with you this morning. You may have noticed, you may not have noticed. This might be your first time here, your first time in a long time, or you might not just pay attention very well. It has been a very long time since I've been able to share with you all by myself. Back in January, that sounded like a kid, like all by myself, but like Bill and I preached together on Easter. I had vocal surgery back in January, which is really fun when you talk for a living to have vocal surgery. Thankfully, the surgery went really well. The recovery went really well to the point, I don't want to brag, my doctor did say that I was a perfect patient. So, I love a gold star moment, and I definitely got one. And I asked my doctor if she had gold stars, and she said no, and I thought that was rude. But unfortunately, I'm still not firing on all cylinders, and so I do have to have another surgery in a few weeks, which is a huge bummer. But that's being an adult, because I plan for many, many years to come to preach at VLG Heights. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to do everything I can to get back in shape vocally. So until then, I'm going to share as much as I'm physically possible before I have to shut it all down once again. So I'm excited to be here with you guys. I'm excited to be sharing. I'm excited about week 2 of Runner. Bill did a phenomenal job last week. I am a little biased, but I do think he is the greatest preacher on the face of the planet. He did a phenomenal job last week of introducing us to Jonah and sharing about how he ran from God, sharing about this story. I love the way he put it, that you don't necessarily have to buy into this whale of a tale. If you don't laugh, it's going to go so much longer. I promise you, this whale of a tale, you don't have to buy into it, because even if you think it's a myth, it's not. But even if you think it is, it's a myth with a message, that there is something in this story, so many things that are so important and so vital to our lives. And so today we're going to pick up where Bill left off. We left Jonah in the whale. He's been sitting there all week, and today we're going to let that sucker out the whale, and we're going to talk about the prayer that he prayed in the darkest moment of his life, literally and figuratively. But if I'm being honest with you, can I be honest with you guys this morning? Like, it's just family, right? We can totally talk about things that are honest. Last week, as Bill was talking, I don't know if you did this, but I was playing a slideshow in my mind, like in the back, kind of rattling around there, of all the times that I have ran from God. All of the times that I've decided I'm going to do it my way and not your way, God. And that didn't feel very good. As a matter of fact, as I was doing it, I realized I just finished, maybe not a run, but like a brisk jog in the opposite direction of what God was telling me to do. And it was hitting me all at once while Bill was talking last week. So now to the part where I want to be honest. I hate, and I don't use that word lightly, hate women's things, like networking events. Like, do not invite me to a scrapbook party. I don't want to do it. I don't want to exchange recipes with you. I'm a very good cook. I don't need your recipes. I got my own. I'm very humble about it too. I don't want to learn to crochet. I don't want to do it. I don't like women's things. But I've never said that like out loud to people, because it just sounds so rude, right? Like, how dare she? The audacity. So when people would ask, like, why doesn't VLG Heights have a men's thing and a women's thing? We would just say, well, we don't feel like that's something we need to do right now. But inside, the tiny little feminist was like, no, down with the patriarchy. And I just didn't want to do it. So a few months ago now, it came up again, and Bill and I were talking about it, and he's like, somebody asked me this, and I think we should talk about it. We should really evaluate this. And I vividly remember, because I was standing at our kitchen counter, and I took my little finger, and I went, I will never lead a women's group. And then insert a rant of like, I want a seat at the real table. I don't want to build another table just so I can have a seat. I, a woman, hear me roar. Never will I ever lead a women's group. And Bill said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to tell God never. And I was like, what do you know? A few weeks later, crow tastes very delicious in our house. A few weeks later, I'm in a board meeting for one of the organizations I serve, and my friend Roger, who leads the Greater Houston Prayer Breakfast, is talking about, like a caveat in the board meeting, talking about the Greater Houston Prayer Breakfast. Now imagine a room of nearly 1,000 people all at this breakfast at 6:30 a.m. That was way too early. We were awake before Jesus. It was awful. But 1,000 people in the room that are all like the elected officials, decision makers, like the who's who of Houston is in this room. The mayor, the police chief, all sorts of like armed people, and it was the safest room in Houston, I will say, for very sure. So he's talking about this event, and he's like, and every single year, we invite all of the men in the room when we're done to join the gathering of men. The gathering of men is great, but it makes me like, every time, I'm like, no, just why do we have to separate? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Guys, you got to rein it in, okay? Somebody's going on a tangent. So he's like, I wish that someone would create a thing for women. I wish that there was an event that women, we could send them to as a follow-up. If only somebody would create this. Well, you are now looking at the proud founder and facilitator of the Houston Women's Collective. I was very reluctant, very hesitant, but I am very, very thankful for this opportunity, and I'm very thankful to have been featured at the Greater Houston Prayer Breakfast and invited every single woman in the room. If they wanted to do something amazing on their faith journey, we were going to do it together, female leaders in the room. If you are a female in this room, you are absolutely invited. We will not crochet. We will not bake cookies. We might bake cookies because everybody loves cookies, but we're not going to exchange. We're not scrapbooking, but we will develop a deeper faith journey, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. So all that to say, last week when Bill was like, have you ever run from God? I was like, I literally just did that. I literally just was like, I will never. Don't say never to God. Don't do it. I feel like Jonah understands. Hannah, why are you telling us all this? Well, one, I needed to catch you up on my life. It's been a long time. I missed you guys. I hope you missed me. But two, this is why we have the story of Jonah. We all have the proclivity to run from God. Whether it is a sprint as fast as we can in the opposite direction, or a brisk jog away from the specific thing he's telling us to do, at some point or at several, we resist his will for our lives. The story of Jonah is my story. The story of Jonah is your story. It's all of our stories because we all have the proclivity. One way or another, you know that things aren't right with you and God. There are moments in our lives where we look and go, I've been doing it my own way, and it doesn't seem to be working out very well. There will be a day of reckoning. And I'm not talking about on the other side of life when you reach eternity and you have to watch the screenplay of your life and go, I see what you see now. That looks really bad. I'm talking about here on earth. There are real world consequences to our running from God. Some of you have actually planned the day of reckoning. Those of you who love to plan out every season of your life, you're looking at it and go, you know what? I'm going to run from God until I get married. Like once we're married, we'll go back to church. We'll do the values and belief thing that our parents taught us. Like until then, let's just run. But for some of you, it's not even that long-sighted. For some of you, you're like, I'm just trying to get to the other side of summer. Like all of my summer plans seem to be really great, and I'd love to not run those past God. So after summer, I'll come back. Sometimes we find ourselves in the middle of this running and knowing that a reckoning is coming and planning for that day by going, if I can just get on the other side of this deal, if I can just reach this milestone, this marker, this goal in my career and not have to consult God, that would be great because I know that I'm going to have to do some really questionable things to get to where I need to go. So if I can just get there, then I'll come back to God. I'll stop running. I'll surrender then. We've planned out that day of reckoning. But what is true for all of us that we discovered last week is that you can run from God, but you can't outrun God. No matter how fast you are, there is no distance you can go to outrun God. Eventually, there is a day of reckoning. And that's what Jonah discovered, and that's where we left him, in the belly of the whale. We're going to pick up where Bill left off and learn from this prayer of surrender that Jonah prayed. Quick review, just in case you weren't here last week. God told Jonah, go to Nineveh. And Jonah went, no. And he got on a boat and went as far as he could, as fast as he could. Storm comes. Not looking great for anybody on the boat. Jonah goes, okay, guys, my bad. Totally me. God's mad. Throw me overboard or we're all going down. So they throw him overboard. Giant fish comes, swallows him up. Like us, Jonah did not have this big theological argument. God said, do this. And Jonah said, I heard what you said, but no thank you. I heard that sermon, but I didn't like it. I read the Bible, but it sounded too complicated. Like I heard what this really trusted mentor said, but I don't want to do that, so no thank you. And that's where we find Jonah. Jonah ran in the opposite direction, as many of us do. But then he bumps into this gigantic idea that I want us to unpack together today. Jonah discovered that God is generous in his grace, but he is thorough in his discipline. There is a tension there because we want God to be all grace. We're like, I'll just keep living my own way. I'll keep doing whatever I want to do, and God's going to forgive me, right? Yeah, but he is also more so over and above. He is full of, all of love. And because he is all love, he is generous with grace while still being thorough in his discipline. Not so he can pay us back, but so he can bring us back. Even if God wanted to, he doesn't, but let's just play devil's advocate. Even if God wanted to pay you back, doesn't. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. The price has already been paid by Jesus on the cross. So there is no paying you back. There is no vengeance. There is only loving, generous grace and discipline. So if you're facing a storm in your life, it very easily could be God trying to get you back. And chapter 2 of Jonah is where we're going to pick up. And he's in the fish for a couple of days. And when he gets out, he basically journals what happened while he was in the fish. And he gives us this poem or song or prayer. Different theologians view it in different ways. But nonetheless, he's describing his interaction with God while in the fish. And that interaction with God is what allowed him to discover God is generous with his grace and thorough in his discipline, not to pay us back, but to bring us back. So real quick, we got to go back to Jonah, the very end of chapter 1, verse 17. It says, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Chapter 2, verse 1 says, from inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. In verse 2, we find the best part of this story. While this next statement that we're about to read was written almost 2,800 years ago, it's been said by every generation, every language, since the beginning of time. Verse 2 says, in my distress, I called to the Lord. In my distress, in the darkest moment of my life, when there was no amount of chaos that was not heaped upon me, I called out to the Lord. Isn't that true for so many of us? That the first time you prayed in a very long time was in your distress? When you were in the backseat of a police car, handcuffs and everything, you cried out to God. You were driving home to tell your parents something that you had been avoiding. You were holding the phone, waiting to call your spouse to tell them something before they found out. And in your distress, no matter what you had already believed about God, no matter what you had convinced yourself to be true of him, regardless of how you had justified your sin and disobedience, in your distress, you called out to God. No matter how smart you are, how connected you are, how careful you were, how slick you were, suddenly when you were busted and broken and betrayed and your back was against the wall, when you had no place else to run, in your distress, you called. In my distress, I called. In our distress, we called. Verse 2 finishes, and he answered. Jonah repeats it. From deep in the realm of the dead, when I was on the verge of death, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. God listens to the desperate cry for help from desperate people in desperate circumstances, even when they are of their own making. I think we assume that we're too far gone, right? Like, you don't know, you don't know what I did. You don't know what I have done. You don't know how I've acted. You don't know the pain that I have caused. You don't know how far I have run. But what Jonah really wants us to learn is that you don't understand how generous God is with his grace. If you've said the words, you don't know, like you don't know how bad it is. You don't understand how generous God is with his grace. That is a constant, daily, moment by moment invitation for you to come back. No matter how far you've sprinted off course, he wants you back, and for you to surrender your will to his. Verse 3 says, you hurled me. This is Jonah talking to God, and he says, you hurled me, not the sailors, into the depths. Jonah realized that it wasn't the guys on the boat, it wasn't the storm swirling around them, it wasn't the fish that swallowed him that were the cause of his misfortune. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me, and your waves and your breakers swept over me. God, I see now that you were behind the chaos. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. Next, we get to an interesting part of Jonah's prayer, but I want to paint a picture before we read it. You remember, Jonah's on a boat in the middle of a storm. The boat's about to sink. And Jonah's like, guys, you got to throw me over. Like, I've made God so mad. I know it's my fault. Save yourselves. Hurl me over. But here's my question. They throw him over. But at what point in this story do you think Jonah repented? At what point do you think he finally broke? Do you think it was day 2 inside the fish? The afternoon of day 3? Late into the first night when he's like, you know what, this doesn't look so good. It kind of feels icky. I don't think this is a time to repent. No, I think it was when one guy said to the other guy, you grab his wrist, I'll grab his ankles, we're going to hurl him over. I think it was somewhere like around the first time that his body cleared the side of the boat as they were going, and a 1, and a 2. Like, I think he repented before he ever hit the water. Like, he's midair going, I see now what I've done, God. I will go to Nineveh. I will go to Narnia. I will go anywhere, everywhere in between. I will go for however long you want me to go. I will stay until you tell me to leave. Whatever you want me to do, hits the water. I think before he ever hit the water, he was like, I missed it. Whoops. He was a new man before that fish ever even swallowed him. On a much smaller scale, my kids do the exact same thing. I can very calmly and very politely say, boys, I need you to stop. Boys, I need you to obey. Boys, you're having a really tough time listening, because it's always both of them, right? They're old enough now where it's never just one of them. It's a herd mentality, and so if they're making poor choices, they're doing it together, and they're riling each other up, and boys, this is not a good idea. Boys, I'm going to need you to obey, and I don't even have to yell. All I have to do is go, bring me your Switch. And the second that Nintendo Switch leaves their hands and enters mine, they are changed humans. Like, I'm so sorry, Mommy, for everything I've ever done. I love you, and you're pretty, and Daddy's so handsome, and he's so funny, and I love the old dog, and I love my brother, and I'll eat all the food, and I'll do all the things. Like, they are changed people the second the consequences land. It's not until those consequences hit our lives that we feel the shift. It's not until we recognize the repercussions that we go, that was a bad idea. As parents, Bill and I believe that it's important to associate rebellion with pain and difficulty and heartache, because we as adults know that rebellion always leads to pain and difficulty and heartache. Learning that lesson early in life makes obedience as an adult that much easier, because we never outgrow our need to surrender to God. He makes his discipline thorough to ensure that we never run again. God is generous with his grace and thorough with his discipline, because he loves you so much that he is not trying to pay you back. He's trying to win you back and bring you back. He uses the pain of your experiences, the scars of your sin, the consequences of your actions, to draw you close to him. In his great love for you, he wraps you up in his arms to guarantee that you know where to find safety. You know where to go when you need strength. You know what it feels like to be restored. So God allowed Jonah to rattle around inside a fish for 3, what were surely longest days of his life, and 3 long nights. Listen to how he describes it in verse 5. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me as the fish dove beneath the surface. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. Everything in that fish's guts were all just swirling around him. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. God's discipline is thorough. Just look at some of the stories we have in the Old Testament. When the nation of Israel rebelled, God sent them into captivity for 70 years. Like, you can imagine around year 3, they were like, we get it now, God. We're just so very sorry. We won't do all these pagan things anymore. And God was like, So around year 7, they're like, okay, but really, we're still sorry. Like 17, 70, that's a long time. When the nation of Israel disobeyed God in the wilderness, they wandered for 40 years. I haven't even been on the earth 40 years, and I understand that is a very long time. When King David disobeyed God, God wreaked havoc with his family, with his authority, with his reputation. There were so many points where David had to have felt like, this seems too stringent for what I've done. Like, this seems like more than what I deserve. But even in his brokenness, God never abandoned King David. In fact, if you look at the lineage of King David, eventually you'll get to the name of the Messiah. Because no matter how far you run, God's love for you ensures that he still has plans and a purpose for you, and he will do anything to get you back. Verse 6, Jonah continues, but you, in the midst of all this chaos, when I thought it was over, when it felt like it was more than I deserved, you, Lord, my God, brought my life up from the pit you put me in. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayers rose to you, to your holy temple. Then he gets to the most clarifying part of this prayer. This is the pinnacle of what Jonah prayed. This next verse describes the dilemma that every person who is running from God faces, but he says it in a way that condenses our experience down to one single statement. Verse 8 says, those who cling to to worthless idols, turn away from, they forfeit, they lose, they abandon God's love for them. When you run from God, it's because you're running to something else, someone else, an opportunity, a lifestyle, a pleasure, entertainment. When you run from God, you run to something. And here's what Jonah says: everyone who runs from God, when they finally arrive at the place they've been running to, when they embrace what they've been running towards, when they get to the person they traded life for, when they arrive at the season in life, they find themselves in the middle of all they've wanted. Then they realize that what they've devoted their time to, given their life for, spent their youth on, is not what they thought it was. They begin to miss out on what they used to have. What they wanted, what they pursued, is not worth what they gave up. Because what they gave up is the most valuable relationship in the universe, a relationship with their Heavenly Father. Runners don't get to experience God's love because they have distanced themselves, not from His love for them. You can never outrun His love, but from the experience of His love. Jonah teaches us that there is a moment of realization where runners discover, I have traded the will of God for worthless idols. And the reason I can say this with confidence is because in your despair, you don't cry out for whatever you pursued when you turned your back on God. In your despair, you cry out for God and God alone. Because in your gut, you know the most valuable thing about living, the most valuable thing about your life is a relationship with your Heavenly Father. Knowing that He cares for you, He loves you, and He is looking out for you. Every human in their soul knows this is most important. He is our creator. There is no distance we can run to separate ourselves from Him. That's why in our despair, we never cry out for the things we pursued when we chose not to pursue God. Despite all the brokenness and chaos, Jonah experiences a moment of peace in verse 9. He says, but I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed I will make good. I will say salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish to vomit Jonah onto the dry land. And here's what happens next. And this is where we're going to stop in the story and reflect. Chapter 3, verse 1. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. What do you think Jonah did this time around? Yes, sir, right away. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Why do you think the Lord came to him a second time? Because He is always generous with His grace. Even when He has to be thorough in His discipline, He still loves you so much that He can't wait to get you back. Go to the city of Nineveh and proclaim to the city the message I have given you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord, and he went to Nineveh. This time, I bet he ran as fast as he could to get to Nineveh, like fire coming off his feet. Here's how I would like us to respond today. I think there are a lot of us in this room who are running from God. There are many of us who chances are you've distanced yourself so far from God that you might say every single day, you don't know what I've done. You don't understand grace then. But maybe there are others in the room that you know God is telling you to do something, and it just doesn't feel good. Like, I don't want to do that. It seems very uncomfortable, very embarrassing, very awkward, very painful. I don't want to do that. So whether it is a sprint in the opposite direction or a jog hoping that no one will notice, you're running. And I have found in my life the quickest way to stop the run is worship. To tune my heart into God's, to exchange my will for His, to come to Him humbly and open and honest and say, God, I'm sorry. I've been trying to do it my own way, and very clearly that is not working. So would you exchange all of who I am for all of who you are? But there's another level to this when you're running. Worship is great, but I think what Jonah wants us to hear is that surrender is even better. Worship God always, without ceasing. But surrender when you're running. You've got to stop and turn around, change directions, get back on course, and surrender to your Heavenly Father because He loves you and He wants you back. So how we do that is we raise our hands when we worship. You're like, oh man, you had me. You had me until you said, that just feels weird. I don't want to do that. That feels awkward. I think other people look weird when they do it, so I'm sure that people will think I look weird when I do it. Okay, let me just clear this up. Nobody cares. This has nothing to do with anyone else in the room. Nobody beside you, nobody around you, not me, not the band, nobody in this room. This is between you and God. Because there is nobody that you are running away from as much as you are running away from God. So we're going to spend the next few minutes worshiping. And if you need to surrender, I challenge you, I invite you, raise your hands and ask God to exchange your will for His. Let me pray for you. Jesus, we love you. And we are overwhelmed by your goodness, overwhelmed by your grace, overwhelmed by your discipline. God, thank you for loving us so much that you won't leave us how we are, that you won't let us slip away. So God, right now, as we reflect on our lives and where we are, would you illuminate the areas where we are trying our hardest to run from you? So that God, in all of our wisdom that you have given to us, we can surrender. We can give all of these things that we're trying to hold tightly to back over to you, knowing that your control is far better than anything we could ever do on our own. So God, we love you. We thank you. We surrender to you.